So, good evening. What a great way to celebrate Earth Day with tonight's program to learn about the latest trends in gardening. So, welcome to Backyard Habitats and Homegrown Food, hosted by Carroll County Public Library. I'm Dorothy Stoltz, Director for Community Engagement with the library. Tonight's program is sponsored by Union Mills Homestead in partnership with PNC, Heartwood Nursery, and Carroll County's Celebrating America initiative. I'd like to go over just a little bit of housekeeping, and please put your comments and questions in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can. The recording will be available after the program through various social media pages, including Carroll County Public Library's Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, but also the Facebook pages of Union Mills Homestead, Heartwood Nursery, and Alloway Creek Farms. So now I'd like to introduce Janet Shriver, who will be our moderator this evening. And Janet will introduce the panelists. Janet is the chairperson of the Flower and Plant Market for the Union Mills Homestead. She is a lifetime member of the Homestead, a member of the Holly Society of America, and an enthusiastic gardener. So let's please welcome Janet Shriver.
Thank you, Dorothy. I'm pleased to be serving as this year's chairperson of the 51st Flower and Plant Market held at the Union Mills Homestead, which is located in Union Mills, just north of Westminster, Maryland. Tonight's virtual presentation of backyard habitats and homegrown food will include talks with two women who have been involved with the nursery trade for many years. First, we have Sue Hunter. Sue is founder and owner of Heartwood Nursery, a career professional horticulturist and propagator by trade for over 30 years. Sue specializes in seed and cutting propagation and growing of native and other woody species with a focus on American hollies, offering the finished product to both wholesale growers and retail customers. In addition, educational events such as the Serviceberry Festival, beekeeping classes, pollinator workshops, environmental preservation tours, and the Holly Festival are held at Heartwood throughout the year. Sue is currently serving a consecutive term as president of the Holly Society of America, an international botanical organization dedicated to promoting, preserving, and educating all about the genus Ilex. After Sue, we will hear from Barbara Steele. Barbara maintains a schedule of lectures and demonstrations for garden clubs, designs herb and vegetable gardens, and consultations for those who desire to create their own gardens of delight. Her garden writing and art is occasionally seen in the Essential Herbal magazine. She's a graduate of the Maryland Institute College of Art, and after 38 years of being in the greenhouse and raising plants at Alloway Creek Gardens, she closed the business and semi-retired to enjoy her family, art, garden, and farm. Good for you, Barbara. Both Barbara and Sue will be happy to answer questions, so feel free to send them in on the comments section of the screen. And first up, we'll hear from Sue.
Thank you, Janet, Dorothy, and sponsors for holding this event and asking me to participate. And thank you very much for supporting our local independent nurseries. Not only are plants necessary for wildlife and pollinators, they are crucial to us as well. Being a part of nature is instrumental to our well-being. It decreases depression, boosts our creativity, reduces stress and relieves anxiety. It also promotes creativity, and no matter what size your yard is, whether you have just a few containers on a back porch, whether you have a small yard, a larger yard, or an open field to create beauty in, you can just try not to overthink things and just get started with planting and be an inspiration to yourself and your family and others as well. Next slide, please. Okay, first we're going to be talking about redbud trees. They're blooming now. I just wanted to mention a disclaimer here. The next few slides are going to include native edibles. Before you eat anything, you want to make sure that you've identified the plant correctly. Additionally, if you have a health concern or a health condition, you want to consult your physician or healthcare provider before eating any parts of any plant. And positive identification of what it is that you're eating beforehand is crucial. Toward the end of the edible plants, I'm going to be showing you an example of something that is not edible as well. So blooming now is beautiful Cercis canadensis. That's our native redbud tree. They're quite prolific in the area. There is a very wide range of color variation among the flowers, ranging from white to pale pink, to darker pink, to fuchsia, to purple. So this time of year, I usually field a lot of questions from people saying, well, if the flowers are pink and purple, why is it called redbud? That's because the very small emerging buds before they flower fully are a bright red. So as I say, when the flower does open, and this time of year they're open pretty widely right now, you can definitely see the color variation. So the blossoms are edible. The plant itself is in the legume family. The seed pod resembles that of a pea pod, and the seed pods are edible as well. Redbuds are not a hard tree to grow at all. Sometimes people will have a large redbud tree in their yard, and it's proven to be a very hardy selection, and it will seed itself in areas and gardens, and people say, well, I pull the trees out, and because it's so prolific, sometimes that happens. Other selections aren't as prolifically seeding as some are. The tree itself blooms at a very young age. It's a medium to fast growing tree. Unfortunately, it's not a very long-lived tree. It does prove to be very susceptible to canker, probably when it gets to be about 15 to 20 years old. Usually the trees don't last any more than 40 to 50 years, although someone on here may prove me wrong and say they know of a 75 or 100-year-old specimen tree somewhere. So the flowers are crucial to early pollinators. Bees and butterflies depend on the pollen and nectar, and moth larvae feed on the leaves. Next slide, please. Service berries. This is one of our most versatile native trees. They finished blooming in my area, which is Zone 6B. I'm in southern York County, Pennsylvania. They finished blooming about last week, and surprisingly enough, the berries will be ripe by Father's Day. Truly, it's one of the fastest trees that I've ever seen go from flower to fruit, to edible fruit, in a matter of about 6 to 7 weeks. There are several different native species of serviceberry that are native to all of the states throughout the continental United States. This is Amelanchier canadensis. Two of the common names for serviceberry are Juneberry and Shadblow serviceberry. They're very easy to grow. They are quite tenacious despite their graceful, delicate appearance. They're also very tolerant of urban situations. An example of this would be up at the Capitol building in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, right amongst the pavement and the asphalt. Next to the Capitol building, there is a planting of over a dozen serviceberry trees. And really the conditions are fairly harsh as far as pollution goes and absorbed heat during the summertime and into the fall. And those trees have been there for years. They're doing quite well. They get flowers and fruit every year reliably. The berries are very good. They taste, in my opinion, they taste somewhere between a blueberry and a grape. They're a little time consuming to pick because if you can notice the stem on that berry, it's a little bit long. So it's kind of hard to pick them in clusters like in the manner of picking blueberries. You really do need to pick each individual berry. So it does take quite a while to pick them. Another reason they're not really commercially available is because they don't have a very long shelf life, nor do they last very long in the refrigerator. But if you pick them and immediately put them into the freezer in Ziploc bags, they will keep, in my experience, they will keep up to 1.5 years in the freezer and be perfectly fine. So once a year, we have a serviceberry walk here at the nursery. It's always the Friday and Saturday before Father's Day because that's when the serviceberries are at their peak ripeness. We pick the berries and freeze them, and as I give a tour through the serviceberry grove, I encourage people to pick and taste as they go along. As I said, it's a very small, delicate looking tree. It's one of the first trees in the springtime to bloom. They're easy to spot out in the woods right now or a little bit earlier, probably in the Maryland area, because they do bloom before the leaves emerge on other trees. So people may also say, you know, well, I have a small yard, but I want a serviceberry. Can I plant just one? Well, with serviceberry, the answer is yes. The serviceberry tree is what we call monoecious. Both male and female parts are on the same plant, so they will bear berries. They just might not bear as many berries. So with all these native fruit trees and plants, it's best to plant them in colonies because the more you plant, the better their chances are for pollination and bearing fruit. Okay, next slide. Okay, again, this is just another picture of serviceberries. They start out being kind of a pale yellowish green, and then they ripen very quickly to a rose color, and then a dark purple. And the size of the berry and the taste of the berry vary from tree to tree. It's kind of interesting to note how diverse the species actually is. On some of the trees, the fruit is larger. On other trees, the fruit is smaller. And also, serviceberry is one of the, if not the very first tree to go into dormancy. After the summer solstice, after June 21st, those shorter day lengths trigger the serviceberry tree to go dormant. And I think the fact that the fruit has ripened and is usually gone by then, because birds love the fruit, deer like the fruit. I just can't think of anything or anybody that doesn't like the fruit. And once that fruit has been depleted, the tree really does start to go into dormancy, and sometimes it will lose its leaves later in the summer, and people think the tree is dying, but it's not. So the other picture is just cooking the serviceberry down. You can kind of cook them down like cranberries, but they don't take nearly as long to cook down. Next slide. Okay, so this is Sambucus canadensis. This is American elderberry. Last year we sold completely out of elderberry. We've just really seen a demand for this plant increase as popularity and knowledge increases about alternative treatments, and people are becoming more and more health conscious. Elderberry is not a plant that you can plant in a container. You do need a little bit of room for it. It can tend to pop up in other areas of your garden. I have it planted in a big circle, and then we just kind of mow around the circle to keep it from popping up in other areas in the garden. But it's a beautiful plant. The flowers are quite fragrant. They can be edible as well as the berries. And these plants will be available at the Union Mills plant sale coming up shortly. Next slide. Okay, these are more of our native fruits. How many of you knew that Vaccinium coriambosum, which is the high bush blueberry on the left, that is a native species in Maryland and Pennsylvania. They are a low understory plant. They tend to like a little bit moister areas, but well-drained soil. They like rich, humusy soil in the woods. They don't bear as much fruit in the woods because they receive a lot of shade. So any of these native fruit trees and native shrubs that I'm going to be talking about will grow in sun or shade. But for maximum fruit production and maximum berry set, it is best to plant them in full sun. Like I say, they will grow in the shade. They will just attain a different habit. They will stretch toward the light and not be as full as they would be if they were planted in the full sun. And by planting in the full sun also, they will bloom more and get pollinated a little better. So the picture on the right is spice bush, Lindera benzoin. All parts of this plant are edible. Lindera benzoin just finished blooming in the woods. It gets tiny little yellow flowers all up and down the stems. When you scratch the bark, it's very pungent, very fragrant. That's a good way to ID it. When you're taking a walk and you're looking at dormant plants, or if you're not sure, you could just take your thumbnail and scratch the bark, and you will definitely notice a very pleasant odor. I like the berries. There's a place in the Midwest that actually has a spice bush festival, and they make jelly and different things out of the berries. The berries are they're very waxy, and the seed inside is round. It can be used in place of allspice once the seed are dried and ground. Tea is made from the leaves and the bark. It's a very, very beautiful, very nice plant. Now, this is one that I would not plant in full, hot, complete sun. I've seen them planted in the sun before, but they do tend to struggle a little bit more. So even just a little bit of shade would be okay for this plant. Next slide, please. Okay, so Pawpaw is on the left-hand side, and thanks to social media pages and, again, an increased awareness about native fruits, the Pawpaw has really been receiving a lot of good publicity lately. There are Pawpaw festivals in different areas now. It's a very easy tree to grow. The deer do not like it at all, which is a big bonus. Standing alone, you can grow the tree as a specimen tree by itself. It's actually quite beautiful. It's even tropical looking, but don't really expect to get any fruit. This is a tree that does like to be planted in colonies. And in order for it to be pollinated, the more trees from different sources you plant, the better for cross-pollination. Now this bucket of fruit here, and if you can see, I have a dime on the top fruit just for size comparison. These I harvested from the Pawpaw orchard that I have here at the nursery, and they were just trees that I propagated from seed from the woods. Now I did plant these trees out in the full sun. I did not plant them back in the shade. Took them a little while to get established, gave them lots of deep watering at first, and now we get hundreds of pounds of fruit off of these trees. And it's interesting because there's one tree that just produces this small football size type fruit, and then there are some trees that produce smaller fruit. We don't grow the trees and harvest the fruit to eat. I grow the trees so I can harvest the fruit. We put the pulp in the woods for animals to eat, and then we save the seeds. Not all of the seeds, because I want animals to disperse the seed throughout the environmental preserve, but we collect most of the seeds so I can grow more trees to sell to homeowners. So the buckeyes, which is a picture next to the Pawpaw. Buckeyes are toxic, and this is a good example of knowing your plants before ingesting. Buckeyes are gaining in popularity, especially the red buckeye and the yellow buckeye, because they have very showy flowers that attract birds and pollinators. The fruit is beautiful. It looks like petrified wood. It looks like you could eat it, but don't do it. They say the fruit is toxic. I do believe the Native Americans used to boil it and leach it and boil it and leach it, and they would scrape the inside flesh out and smash it into a paste and ingest it, but I do not suggest doing that at all. So this is one you do want to stay away from, despite its attractive appearance. The trees themselves are beautiful. The red buckeye is a small tree. It gets very showy red flowers, tubular flowers that hummingbirds are attracted to. Aesculus octandra is the yellow buckeye. It's tall. It's a taller tree than the red buckeye, and the flowers are yellow. Next slide, please. So on the left, we have Aronia melanocarpa, which is the black Aronia. It's a very interesting native fruit and plant. The plant itself is absolutely beautiful. It's a small shrub. The leaves are very thick. They're almost waxy. They're a bright emerald green throughout the growing season, and then in the fall, they start changing from yellow to gold to orange to scarlet to red. The berries ripen mid to late summer. They are edible. People make wine out of them. You can use the Aronia berries just as you would a blueberry. You can use them in pies, muffins. You can make Aronia berry crisp instead of apple crisp. You can make Aronia jelly. The antioxidants in Aronia berries are reportedly higher than that of blueberries. But to pick them off of the shrub itself and eat them is an acquired taste. They have a very musky, very different taste when you try to eat them raw. So I do suggest adding them to things, and they are much better cooked. So of course, we need to include pollinator perennials with all of our native edible fruit plants. So the picture on the right are various mountain mints. The picture on the immediate right is Pycnanthemum muticum. That's the clustered mountain mint. It is probably the #1 pollinator plant of all time. If you plant this, you will just want to take a lawn chair and sit out there next to the plant and watch the carnival of insects that are attracted to this plant. I've kind of nicknamed it the Mardi Gras of plants, because you will see every colorful insect and bee and wasp, that things you have just never seen being attracted to plants come to this plant. So I had a customer one year that had her children with her, and they were watching the insects on this plant, and the mom was a little leery about buying the plant because she was afraid that the children would get stung. And honestly, one could fall into this plant, and the insects are in such a frenzy to get to this plant and collect the pollen. They don't even notice people. They just keep right on working on this plant. So it truly is amazing to see what is attracted to this plant. It can also be used as a ground cover. It does well in the full sun, gets very scraggly in the shade. It has a height of about 1 to 2 feet. And trust me when I say it is fragrant all times of the year. Even in the winter time, we make a lot of holly wreaths here and sell cut greens at Thanksgiving and Christmas time. And I have a customer that comes in and cuts the dried stalks of mountain mint and puts them in her wreath every year. And they're just beautiful. So, okay, next slide. Okay, these are native persimmons. This is a Diospyros virginiana. Native persimmons are dioecious. That means you need two trees to pollinate. You need a male tree and you need a female tree. It's very difficult to tell what sex the trees are when they're sold at nursery size, because they don't start blooming until they're about 5 or 6 years old. So again, the best thing to do with native persimmons is try to buy, as many as your budget can afford, because the more you plant, the more you increase your chances of getting both a male and female trees. It's a fairly long-lived tree, slow growing, has beautiful, beautiful bark as it ages. The flower buds are very pretty. They're a little bit hard to see because they're on the undersides of the branches, so you have to go looking for them. but it is a nice native fruit tree to have. You can use the persimmons after a first frost. You don't want to use them before because they will they're very sour and very bitter, so they need to have that exposure to the cold temperatures before you use them. But you can use them in pudding, you can use them in cake, you can use them any way that you would use pumpkin or zucchini. And they really are very good. And save the seeds and plant more persimmon trees. They're not that hard to germinate. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we're kind of phasing out of the native edibles now. These, I included these 2 viburnums. This is Arrowwood viburnum, which is Viburnum dentatum, and the American cranberry viburnum. So long ago, our ancestors used to use these berries as food and things that they would prepare. But unless you want to add like 5 pounds of sugar to a cup of fruit, I don't suggest doing it. So I get a lot of customers that come in who want to solely plant for the birds. These are fabulous native shrubs to plant for the birds. The blueberries start forming, trying to think, mid to late summer. They turn this indigo blue color, and then as it gets cooler, they turn darker, but usually by then the birds have gotten them. The American cranberry viburnum turn bright red later in the summer. They persist through the winter time. Here at the nursery, the birds don't really come in and get the American cranberry viburnum until about January or February. I'm not sure whether it's because there's so much to eat here as far as other things go, and then they just save them until last. But when they move in to get them, sometimes you'll see up to 100 robins and cardinals on the same shrub. So these are just 2 of the best species that you can plant in a wildlife hedge, or singularly even as specimen plants if you have a small yard. Okay, next slide. So another really great plant that I like to suggest to people to plant instead of forsythia is the native ninebark. Physocarpus opulifolius. It's the picture on the left. It has the same kind of growth habit as forsythia. It's a native. It gets these beautiful bowers of flowers early in the summer to midsummer. The seed capsules are very attractive to birds. It's a great, it makes a great hedge for birds to overwinter in. It gets the common name from its interesting exfoliating bark throughout the year. So it really does have a lot of year-round interest. It is not evergreen. It does lose its leaves in the fall, but if you plant it close enough, it can become very thick, like a hedge or thicket. So it is hard to see through. I get a lot of people in here that want evergreen. They want to plant something close together to block out something. And that this is a great plant for that if you intersperse it with other species. It's also very fast growing. And I just really, when it's given the right location, I really can't think of anything negative to say about this plant at all. So the picture on the right is just kind of a pollinator garden in the works. If you can see in the upper left-hand corner of that, there is some of the ninebark. And when I design gardens for people and I plant display gardens here at the nursery, very, very rarely do I set out with any kind of intentional plan. I like to randomly group plants. I like to group plants in colonies. I like to group plants according to height. I never group according to color. I try not to overthink it. I just do it, and I just plant, and the result is always pretty good, I think. Next slide, please. Okay, so in this slide on the left-hand side, we have the Hearts of Buston. It's the native Euonymus americanus. It is not like the invasive Euonymus, which is Euonymus elatus, but it definitely rivals the invasive Euonymus as far as beauty and color in the fall. This is a picture of the native Euonymus that's fruiting. So in the fall, these little red capsules open up to display the brighter red seed. And usually the leaves have fallen off of this before that happens. The leaves do turn yellow to red in the fall, but usually by the time it's fruiting, the leaves are gone. And it will retain this display of fruit sometimes through Christmas, depending on the temperatures, sometimes into January if the birds have not found the seed yet. It's a great companion plant for other things like summer sweet or buttonbush. It really is a stunning plant, and when people see this plant, they want to know what it is and if it's for sale. So there will be some of that included in the Union Mills plant sale as well. So the little white flower is the white wood aster. It's a beautiful native fall flowering aster that occurs along the edge of the woods in the Piedmont. It's great for naturalizing. When the flowers go to seed, the seed are dispersed and they just come up all over the place, and it's a wonderful plant. So this is a picture of the pollinator meadow here at my nursery. Again, this pollinator meadow it's a 5-acre area here at the nursery that was created with very, very little intent and very little planning. We mow it off once a year, usually earlier in the year. And I just can't say enough about pollinator meadows. And you don't have to have 5 acres to do something like this. You could do something like this, in a couple of square feet, and just don't mow the grass. Just see what comes up. You'd be really surprised at how many species will come up naturally on their own. It's ever changing. I like to walk down to this every day because it's almost like the sea. You never know what color it's going to be. You never know what's going to be blooming. It's just a beautiful thing, that it attracts songbirds and wildlife. Pollinator meadows and unmowed patches of area in your yards create optimum water infiltration, and they're also drought tolerant, and unmowed patches of beauty like this prevent sediment runoff as well. Next slide, please. Okay, this is Hamamelis virginiana. This is our fall blooming native witch hazel. I honestly cannot think of a more beautiful fall blooming shrub than this. So the witch hazel that people are used to seeing in January and February, those are not the native witch hazel. So there are a lot of other species of witch hazel that bloom during the winter time. They're all different colors of yellow, gold, red, and rust. Those are not the native. This is the native. It blooms somewhere about mid-September until maybe the end of October. It has a very, very interesting, very refreshing, very clean fragrance to the flower, and is very beneficial to late pollinators. It is very easy to grow. These particular shrubs were grown in full sun. It's an understory plant, so it does well in, say, 70% shade to complete sun. Next slide, please. Again, here's some more pictures of the pollinator meadow. So my property is also preserved through the York County Farms and Natural Lands Trust, which a fact that I'm very proud of. So this is a mature Upper Piedmont hardwood woods in the background, which includes a lot of different oak species. This is my favorite oak, which is chestnut oak or Quercus prinus. It's one of the most drought-tolerant oaks that you can grow. It's very hardy. It's a very long-lived tree, except a lot of our oak species are becoming more and more susceptible to oak wilt, which is a pathogen that gets inside and kind of eats the tree away from the inside out. So it's kind of discouraging to see how many oaks are succumbing to that. But to that, I can say just keep planting more. Just keep planting more. Hopefully we can stay ahead of the game. Next slide, please. So this is a sourwood tree on the right, the tree with the red leaves. As Janet mentioned, I am a career native woody plant propagator. That means I propagate trees and shrubs from seed and cuttings that I collect. Most of the time, it's from collected seed, from stock plants that I've grown here on my property. So this is an example of a tree that I grew from seed. And I just want to put it in perspective that the picture on the left is the seed of the sourwood right there on my fingertip on the glove. So each one of those little tiny gold specks on the fingertip of my glove is one sourwood tree seed. So isn't it amazing that one tree seed that size can grow into a 20-foot tree like the one in the picture on the right? So that's the beauty of what I do, and that's, it's the beauty of nature. Sourwood tree is a great tree for honeybees. It's also a very hardy tree in this area. It's not native to this area, but it is hardy here. I guess it's slow to medium growth habit. There's some beautiful specimen sourwood tree at Longwood Gardens. But I do sell a lot of these because of more and more people keeping bees. They like the sourwood blossoms for the honeybees. And I just want to mention too that most of the plants that I sell and the plants that will be available at Union Mills as well, they're in smaller containers. I understand that people, sometimes they think the bigger trees they plant or the bigger shrubs they plant, the better. And that's just not necessarily true. A lot of these species do much better when they're planted at a younger age and a smaller root size. They tend to root into the ground faster. and they just tend to grow a lot faster when they're planted from a smaller size. It does not take them a long time to get established at all. Next slide, please. So I do specialize in Ilex opaca or American holly propagation. I'm a wholesale nursery as well. I sell wholesale holly starter plants to large container nurseries who then in turn pot them up into bigger containers, sell them in those containers, or plant them out into their field for field production. We grow about 15,000 to 20,000 hollies here at the nursery every year. And this is, these are pictures of my propagation house here at the nursery. I am serving consecutive terms as the president of the Holly Society of America. We are a worldwide nonprofit botanical organization devoted to educating and promoting the genus Ilex to all who are interested. For 74 years, our membership has consisted of professional horticulturists, nursery professionals, plant researchers and scientists, home gardeners, arboretum professionals, educators, and those who just love plants. The educational programs and educational outreach that we provide through formal on-site presentations, social media, and our website during the year appeal to the public and is inclusive of all tangents of the horticultural industry. Also, in cooperation with the U.S. National Arboretum, the Holly Society of America is the official international registrar of new selections of the genus Ilex. Our 75th anniversary is next year, and we will be holding our national/international annual meeting in Annapolis, Maryland. If you are interested in learning more about hollies and other unique plants, please consider joining the Holly Society of America. You may join through our website, which is shown here on the banner. And if you join by May 1st, your membership will be good through 2022. Next slide, please. Hollies for habitat. I just can't say enough about Ilex opaca, which is our native evergreen holly. It's one of the most beneficial plants that you can plant for birds and wildlife. It has year-round interest. The only time of year they tend to look a little shabby is now. And I didn't want to include a picture of how they look now because hollies shed their leaves in the springtime. So in the springtime, almost all of their inner leaves or leaves from the previous year turn yellow and fall off. Sometimes on older trees, it's not unusual for the tree to shed their leaves entirely, but they do this as the new foliage for the coming year is pushing or emerging from the ends of the branches. So in my holly orchard this time of year, if I look too carefully at it, it's easy to start getting worried about it. But the hollies always rebound, and then in a couple of months, they look like this again. So Ilex opaca, the American evergreen holly, is a naturally occurring understory plant in this area. It does very well in shade, but it also does very well when it's taken out of that shaded element and planted in the full sun. Hollies are dioecious. They are decidedly male and female plants, and you do need a male and female of the same species for berries on the female plant to develop. So Ilex opaca is one of our native hollies. Also Ilex verticillata, which is in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. That's Ilex verticillata. Winter Gold is the name of the selection, or Winter Gold winterberry, which is an example of a deciduous holly. And Ilex verticillata is native to this area as well, although the habitat for Ilex verticillata is being destroyed at an alarming rate. Next slide, please. Hollies are beneficial for wildlife. So again, I will reiterate that the female holly develops the berries after pollination from the male holly occurs. So in the upper left-hand corner is a picture of an example of female flowers on Ilex opaca. And the pollen-bearing male flowers on the right-hand side of that frame result in the berries in the lower left-hand corner. There are many, many different selections of American holly. There are several yellowberry selections of American holly. There's an example of one at the lower left-hand corner of the right frame. That's Ilex opaca Goldie. Again, hollies are extremely beneficial to birds and other wildlife. It's a picture of some baby robins in a nest that was kind of nestled in an American holly here at the nursery. So an interesting thing about this picture, someone may have noticed that, okay, so baby robins are born in May. Well, why does this holly still have red fruit on it? Good question. Well, the reason for that is holly berries need to attain a certain amount of fermentation before the birds will eat them. So, and the birds know if the berries have achieved that fermentation. So if the berries have not achieved that, they will just leave them alone and the berries will drop to the ground. Sometimes the seed will germinate underneath. Sometimes mice will pick the berries up and they'll go bury them somewhere. But not all holly berries are relished by birds. Sometimes they hang onto the tree for certain reasons. Most of the time it's because they have not achieved that level of fermentation to make them attractive to the birds. And in the picture on the right frame down in the lower right hand corner, if you could see that splash of red, is a planting of winterberry. Okay, next slide, please. Teach our children. Encourage them to explore and get to know more about the natural world. Please, please support horticultural programs and tree and plant units in the lower grades. Encourage careers in horticulture and the environment. Horticulture is not all about soybeans, corn, potatoes, and flower arranging. Farming is not all about sheep, pigs, and cows. There are many tangents throughout the horticulture industry. We need more tree propagators. We need smaller niche nurseries. We need more growers. This is an industry where it is still possible to start out as an apprentice and work one's way up through the positions. Not every career needs to begin with insurmountable college debt. So thank you again, and please let's make every day Earth Day.
Thank you so much for that very educational chat. We've got some questions for you. On the native euonymus, how big does that get? And how would you prune it if it gets really big?
It's not very fast growing. It's also a very graceful open shrub. The one that I have here in the display garden is about 8 feet tall.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually about 8 years old. And I've never pruned it. So when you prune these shrubs, though, you have to be very careful that you don't go in and just cut them all the way back. You want to do what we call selective pruning.
Okay.
And just remove some problem branches here and there, and then just maybe prune a little bit off the top, because you want to preserve the stems that they're going to flower on and then get pollinated and have fruit set.
Okay. And there's a question, can you eat the redbud blossoms raw, or do they need to be cooked?
According to the literature, and I've only tried this once, but according to the literature, you can use them in salads.
Okay. All right. And can you talk a little bit about the Ilex opaca trees, that because some stay fairly small and narrow, and some get really, really big, like some of the Miss Helens in our yard that are 30 feet tall or whatever. Maybe mention a couple that stay narrower, maybe?
Yeah, so with the Ilex opaca, that's a good question. I guess is the question, which selections stay more narrow?
Yes.
Okay, so Martha's Vineyard would be a selection that is a little bit more upright and not as full as Miss Helen. Cedar Hill can stay a little more narrow if you prune it selectively throughout its younger age. Mm-hmm. So those two would. Now there's a new introduction, one that I introduced here from the nursery, that is a fastigiate columnar Ilex opaca that I named Forest Totem. And that one will be commercially available probably in another year. I have some plants started of that. And that one is decidedly very columnar.
Okay. And what does an understory plant mean?
Okay, so an understory plant is a plant that occurs naturally under the canopy of the mature native trees. So when you go for a walk in the woods and you see the towering oak trees and the hickory trees and the maple trees, so Lindera benzoin spicebush would be a companion understory shrub to a plant community like that. So it would be the naturally occurring native shrubs that grow under those native understory trees. That is what we refer to as the understory.
All righty. And I know some of the green back to the Ilex opacas, I know some of the color of the leaves vary by, and that doesn't mean anything bad, does it? That's just a different species, cultivar. like Dan Fenton seems to have a very dark green leaf as opposed to Miss Helen.
Yes, you are correct. And I see a question from Mike Ponte. Hi, Mike. Yes, you're right. Vera is somewhat columnar. And I think Mike would also agree with me too that the shades of green among Ilex opaca number in the hundreds.
Yeah.
They can go anywhere from emerald green to olive green to, you know, a bright green, even bluish green. And the selection that you mentioned, Janet, Dan Fenton in the wintertime, if we're having a mild winter, the leaves can turn almost maroonish. So there's huge diversity amongst the shades of green in Ilex opaca.
All righty. All right. Thank you so much, Sue. That lots of information there for all of us to process and think about. Now we will move along to Barbara. Barbara's been a lifetime member of the Union Mills Homestead and just does wonderful things with herbs. So let's ask Barbara. Listen to her and ask questions.
Okay. Hi, how are you? Thank you for the introduction. I've enjoyed my association with Union Mills, and I was in the greenhouse business for a total of 38 years, growing a lot of herbs, perennials, and some of those native trees that Sue talked about. Today, I'm going to talk about something that everybody takes for granted, and that's parsley. It's very interesting that this year, parsley was named the Herb of the Year. They started in 1995. I belong to the group. It was the International Herb Association, and they still today, every year, look at aspects of different plants and decide what they want to feature. It took them all this time to come to pick up little parsley, which is, I think, one of the most valuable herbs that you can use, particularly if you're starting out and you are a little worried about being too heavy-handed in your culinary usage. This is the Italian parsley. It has a flat leaf, and it's one I really like for chopping up and adding to dishes. Parsley goes with a lot of other herb plants that are out there. And it's very high in vitamin C and vitamin A. And this is the parsley that you probably start out with. It's the curly parsley. It was always used as a garnish, and people picked it up like it was a piece of plastic and put it aside. But what you should do is tear it up and put it on top of the baked potato and eat it. It was a breath freshener, and there's even records that in ancient Roman times, when they drank a little too much wine, they ate the parsley, and all that vitamins helped them with their hangovers. So make sure you have some parsley. There'll be plenty of parsley at the Union Mills flower and plant sale. And another aspect with the parsley is I always grow a couple pots of it. It's a great container plant or an aging plant. The swallowtail butterfly larva likes to eat on the leaves and turn into its chrysalids. And the kids really enjoy watching that happen. It's also when it flowers, it's a biannual, and that is very confusing to some people because they say, well, it comes back the second year and then it dies. Well, it comes back the second year to produce flowers that turn into seeds. And the birds will eat the seeds, and you'll see bees around the flowers. So I always plant a couple pots of it, and I kind of keep an eye on one pot that I want to use for my use, and I have the other for the pollinators and the butterflies that are flying around. So plant your parsley and eat it. Got one here. This is rosemary. This one is called Arp, and it was named for a town in Texas. We actually were sent cuttings of this plant years ago when they were trying to determine how far north it could grow as a perennial. Most rosemaries are tender perennials, and what that means is it's hardy someplace else south of here. you need to move south to keep some of these plants going. But in our area this year, I have two arc rosemarys in my garden, one in a container sitting outside in a protected area, and the other one in the ground, and they both wintered over. It was not that hard freeze this winter. The arc is a little different because if you would look at the stems and under the leaves, you see these little woolly hairs. Like, you don't always have to have a little magnifying glass to see that. But those hairs keep the plant from drying out, which is the kiss of death for a plant like rosemary with a real hard freeze. So it's a great plant to use. Rosemary is one of the stronger herbs, so you don't want to be heavy-handed with it, but it's great in lamb, any kind of meat, or soup, stews, and bread. Very good in different bread recipes. A plant that I had to laugh. One year I had a customer who came in and looked at our display garden, and she said, "Oh, that's lavender?" And I said, "Yes." And that's rosemary. Mm-hmm. Well, she had been using lavender and thinking it was rosemary for quite a few years. Obviously, she didn't, it just had a peculiar taste. The rosemary has a pine scent to it, and the lavender is very kind of floral with some pine undertones. This lavender is kind of small right now. It's a perennial, and it likes to grow in full sun, in kind of chalky lime soil, sweet soil, with maybe add some sand to the soil to kind of make for good drainage. It does not like wet feet. It grows on sides of hills and chalky cliffs in England and down in the Mediterranean. There's a lot of different kinds of lavender out there. And lavender is also culinary. You can use this in cookie recipes. We made a lavender lemonade that people really enjoyed. You find all kinds of good recipes now for using the lavender. And of course, the flowers you can dry and use in sachets. But it also has that gray on the leaf, which protects it and keeps it from drying out, but it doesn't want wet feet. So lavender can be a culinary herb. Another plant that, and this is kind of a small one, again, this time of year, some of these are still coming out of the greenhouse, but they'll be at Union Mills. This is a variegated sage, and it's perfectly fine for culinary use. It does not get as large as the standard garden sage, but it's got this beautiful variegation of a cream and almost burgundy and sage green that is wonderful in containers. And so many people now are using containers. You just want to make sure you have good drainage in the bottom of them. Maybe set them up on bricks so that they don't, just get clogged when the pot is sitting on the ground. But a lot of herb plants you can grow, even if you live in an apartment or just have a small windowsill or a little back area, you can grow a really nice assortment of herb plants in a very small area. This plant over here, of course, I was doing parsley and sage and rosemary, so I have to throw thyme in there. Thyme is just, I love the fragrance of thyme, and it's great in soups and stews and chicken blends. The bees love thyme. There are a lot of different kinds. This is a standard English thyme. There's a French thyme with a little bit smaller growth pattern. There's lemon thyme with a wonderful lemon fragrance that's great in all kinds of poultry dishes. And then there's the creeping thymes, which have beautiful little flowers and are great in rock gardens. And the bees like thyme, and it's really good if you can find a beekeeper that has a thyme patch for their honey. So thyme is a perennial. Most thymes are perennials, but they like good, great drainage and sun because they come from a sunny area. back over here, and this one's getting a little overgrown. It's one of my favorite herbs for chicken and fish, French tarragon. It's a perennial, but it doesn't like wet feet either. It likes sun. And you want to get French tarragon that comes from a root cutting as opposed to a Russian tarragon that comes from seed. So every now and then you'll see seed for sale, and you don't want that plant. It does not have the bite of the tarragon, which is kind of a I'm trying to think what it would be. It's somewhat of an anise flavor, but it has a little bit. It's got a very unique flavor, and it's hard for me to describe unless you come and have a taste of a leaf. So that's a great plant to have. Another herb plant that gets maligned a lot is mint. And I call mint a ground cover. So many people spend money to try to cover up the ground with periwinkle or some kind of thing that they don't really get much from. But this is so fragrant. This one is a new one to me. Every year I find some new plant, and my friend Dana with her greenhouse handed me this one to smell, and I fell in love with it. It's called strawberry mint. I don't know what the species, how it's been crossed, but you see that there are a lot of different kinds of mint out there, and you can use them. It makes good cheese. The leaves are great in fruit salads, fresh fruit salads. This is a mint that gets, right now it's kind of lacking for sun, but it gets tall, it gets upright. It has gray woolly leaves. I want to call it thyme, I don't know why. It's a mint that likes to grow in full sun. It does not need to be in extra moist soil by any means. And it's great for mint tea. We used it to make mint tea quite a bit when we had herb luncheons. And it is got those leaves that keep it from drying out. It's woolly apple mint is what we call it. So there's a lot of mints that will be available at Union Mills. And we've got a couple little pamphlets that we came up with years ago when we had workshops. One of them is called Timely Tips, and it really gives you an idea of what herbs go with what vegetables, and there's all kinds of good recipes, how to make mint tea, how to make an herb vinegar. Here's another one, Alloway Gardens Summer Kitchen Herbal Luncheons. Both of these little pamphlets will be available at the gift shop at Union Mills. We've given them to Union Mills, and they've printed them up for sale at their gift shop. So if you're a beginner, or even if you've been around for a while growing herb plants, you might find some really good tips in both of these little pamphlets. Are there any questions?
Any questions on, did you want to mention anything about tomatoes?
Oh, yes. Okay, I was just watching my time here. The tomatoes that I was given came out of the greenhouse, and they all look alike at this point, but I want to point out something that I get confused with, and just how you grow tomatoes. There's two categories, determinate and indeterminate. This tomato plant here is a Rapunzel, and this one is Sun Gold. Both of these are indeterminate. That means that they grow tall, and you need to get a tomato cage or a trellis of some kind that you can, as they grow, you can kind of support them. They will flower all through the season. Once they get started, they keep producing, and they will go right up to frost. Last year, I grew Rapunzel, and this plant, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was going out trying to find bamboo sticks and shoots to support it because it was growing up the window by my back door. It's a salad tomato, but it was delicious and it didn't crack. And there'll be lots of Rapunzels there. There will be a lot of heirloom tomatoes too, which were old tomatoes that were not hybridized and people have saved. But these are indeterminate. And then there are the bush tomatoes, and this one is Celebrity, and this one is, that's Celebrity, and this one is called Bush Goliath. Now the bush tomatoes, they stay more compact. They have a season that's when they start flowering, they go for about 4 to 5 weeks of producing, and then they stop producing. They are ones that people will pick out, like Rutgers, the Celebrity, that are good for canning because they give you a big crop, all kind of comes in together as opposed to over a longer period. So that's the trick about that. And if you have any questions when you go to the garden sale, there will be people around that can kind of answer them and help you with your selection.
Thank you so much. Barbara, we have a question that says, is it okay to plant herbs in a raised garden bed? And can you put different herbs together?
Oh, sure. They seem to complement one another. You have to, read up on how large a plant. Some plants are rather small and they creep, and they would be good at the edge of the bed. Some of them you might want to put a big pot of like rosemary in the middle and sink it partway down so you could take it out and put it in a protected area, particularly if it was like a prostrate rosemary that grows down. They're not winter hardy in our area. So you read the labels and give it space. You don't want to put too many in where they're going to be really touching one another. There's some plants that are more rampant than others, like your mints. Apple mint, I kind of put out the edge of the garden and let it go. It's not. It's not a good neighbor for some of the other type of plants. Yeah.
All right. And another question from Eileen. Should herbs be left to flower? Or should you deadhead them? Like basil?
Yeah. When they start to go in bud and start to flower, that is when the essential oils are up in the leaves. So if you wanted to harvest them to dry, that's a good time to do it. And we always said to harvest them after the dew is off in the morning, but before the heat of the noonday sun. Because if it gets too much heat in the plant, the oils will start to dissipate in the afternoon. But yeah, and some you just want, if you want to pick them fresh, then you could deadhead the flowers. Yes.
All right. And another question is, how do I care for rosemary? Hers keeps dying.
How do you care for rosemary? For what?
Well, that person's rosemary keeps dying.
Okay. Well, what are we doing with it? A lot of the potting soils that you buy might have too much peat in them. You might want to add some amendments. You could put sand, perlite, rotted leaf mulch, a little bit maybe. You don't want to over fertilize them. Even some good topsoil mixed in. You might want to sterilize it first, or get some that doesn't have weed seed in it. But yeah, and when you bring it. Is it dying in the garden or is it dying in the house? If it's in the house, it probably needs some sun, a sunny window, south window would be good. My rosemaries do well in the house, but I keep them in a cool porch, really, that is not overheated. An overheated room sometimes will dry the leaves out. So maybe a cool room, sunny window. I don't hear you. Okay. I don't hear.
Is there, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Is there a way to prevent cilantro from going to seed early?
There is a variety that, and I think it's called Santos, that doesn't go to seed or flowers as fast. There's one variety, this has been a while for me. On that one, you want to try to keep the seeds cut off, you know, to keep it in leaf. Same with dill. There's a dill variety that's shorter and bushier that doesn't go to seed as fast too. A lot of times, I mean, people buy dill as a plant or they buy cilantro, but I found that I like to use, let's say dill, I want to make some pickles. I try to seed it like you would lettuce in the garden, just by seed and seed it in consecutive, you know, every week, put a new seeding of the dill in so it keeps coming up. You could do that with cilantro too. Or just have one cilantro and then sprinkle some seed around it. So you keep a crop coming. It's one of those, they're annuals and they go to seed. That's what they do.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. We've learned a lot with the herbs and the vegetables. Thank you. To end our evening together tonight, Sue has a great story about, well, I'll let her tell it. Thank you.
All right. So this is, since this is the year of the cicada, this is a cicada story. And this is a picture of Birdie. Birdie has become the official mascot of Heartwood Nursery. And I took this picture 17 years ago. So 17 years ago, my youngest son, who is now 33, came to me and said, "Mom, a baby robin has fallen out of the tulip poplar tree and it's on the ground." So I went outside and I just saw this very young baby bird. I don't know how he knew it was a baby robin. I think he was just guessing about it. And I could not believe that it had fallen so far and it was still alive. So he, you know, my son was like, "Well, can we try to save it? Can we try to save it?" Well, you know how that goes with baby rabbits and baby birds and everything. And I just really hesitated because I just didn't know what to do. So I thought we would give it a try. So I repurposed an old dog crate and I put rat wire all around the dog crate. And I put branches in the crate and I had to do something to feed this bird. It finally accepted water out of the palm of my hand. And mind you, this bird, you know, it barely had any feathers on it and just a tuft of pre-feathers on the top of its head. But boy, was it ever making a racket. And I just couldn't not try to save it. I didn't want to bring it into the house. I wanted to try to recreate, you know, its natural environment. So I left this dog crate out in the front yard and I had a raincoat that I covered half of the crate with on the outside in case it rained, because I didn't want the bird to get washed away by the rain. And then I looked around because I had absolutely no idea what I was going to feed this bird. I sent my children out to dig up some worms. They dug worms. We cut them in half. The bird did eat some worms, but it seemed to be having a hard time getting the worms down. So again, it was the year of the locusts. It was 17 years ago. And what do 3 boys do with locusts? They smash them. So we had all these locusts flying around, and my kids just, they were stomping on them. And I noticed that the female locusts had egg masses in their abdomens. And something in my mind just thought, well, here's protein for Birdie. So I started collecting egg masses from the smashed female locusts, and I would put the egg masses on my finger, and Birdie absolutely loved the egg masses from the female locusts. So that is what I raised Birdie on, and Birdie thrived. I think it was a female. She absolutely thrived. She grew. I never tried to make a pet out of her. I didn't want her to get used to me. I didn't want her to get used to anybody in my family. I made it clear to my family that I was the only one to feed her and give her water, because I knew I was going to let her go one day. So as she grew and grew, she was really smart too. We had this picture window in the living room, and she could see from the front yard in that crate into the house through that picture window. Because anytime somebody would walk around in the living room where the picture window was, you could hear her out in her crate making a racket and flapping up and down saying, "You need to get out here and feed me. You need to get out here and pay attention to me." So I knew I was going to let her go. I decided to let her go when I thought it was ready up here at my nursery. The service berry grove that I have in the middle of my nursery where we give the talks and the walk. We had planted it about 5 years prior to that. So it was fairly, the trees were probably about 8 to 9 feet tall, but they were already starting to bear fruit pretty heavily. So I had the idea that I was going to teach her how to use her wings before I let her go in the service berry grove. So I would come up here to the nursery. I would take small branches off of the service berry trees with berries on them. And I would take the branches home, and she learned to pick the berries off the branches. And again, she just thrived. By then, she was jumping on my finger. So when she did that, I would just move my entire hand up and down. And when I did that, she would flap her wings. And just like, a mother knows when their child is ready to leave home, I just kind of knew it was time to let Birdie go. So I brought her up here to the farm, to the nursery. It was about the 3rd week in June. And I opened up the crate, and it didn't take her long to fly out. And she flew out. She was just in a state of surprise when she found out she could fly so well. So she flew kind of in a circle. She landed on this service berry tree right here where I took the picture, and she started eating the service berries. So I was just really proud and happy in myself that I was able to achieve this. I still remember every little detail about taking care of her and what it meant to me. It's probably just one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had with nature in my life. so I would go back to the Serviceberry Grove, I guess for about 3 days after I let her go. And I saw her hanging around, but she was moving more and more toward the woods. And then one day I went down there and she wasn't there. So I really like to think that she, was able to make her own way and pair up with her own kind. And then I just want to add this. A year after that, I was up here at the nursery and I was working, and it was springtime. It was about April or May. And I was out in my nursery and I was working, and this robin showed up and just started buzzing me on the side of my head, flying very, very close to me. And it kept circling around my head and flying very close to the side of my head, which I thought was very unusual. Wow. And I really do think it was her coming back. So that's a little, that's a cicada story there for everyone.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you so much for that. I want to thank Sue and Barb for their participation and their informative stories and talks tonight. I want to thank Melinda, Barbara, Melinda, and Dorothy. Dorothy, take it away.
Okay, thank you all so much. This was a wonderful, wonderful program. I took a lot of notes. I can't wait to go out and purchase some of these service berries and various plants. So I'd like to remind everyone about the flower and plant market at Union Mills Homestead. So that'll be next Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So that's April 30th, May 1st, and 2nd. And I'd like to close by giving a final shout out to all of our sponsors and partners, the Carroll County Public Library, Union Mills Homestead, PNC, Heartwood Nursery, and Celebrating America. So thank you for joining us this evening.